My sister accidentally sent a voice note to the family group chat that was intended for her husband, and that single mistake is about to cost her everything. The caption read, "Guess who has a surprise for you?" I pressed play, expecting good news, but instead I heard my mother laughing. It was a cruel sound that echoed through my empty penthouse. "She really thinks we love her." My father wheezed between chuckles. "What we love is her money." My sister giggled and added, "As long as the check's clear, she can pretend to be part of this family." I stared at the phone. I did not cry. I did not scream. I typed a single line in response. "So do I." Their surprise ended right there, but mine had just begun. $450,000. I speak that number out loud into the silence of my living room and watch the sound waves disappear into the high ceilings. $450,000. Do you know what that kind of money buys you in Chicago today? It buys you a sprawling condo overlooking Lake Michigan with floor-to-ceiling windows just like the one I am standing in. It buys you absolute financial freedom. It buys you a ticket to anywhere in the world where nobody knows your name. For most people, that number represents a lifetime of savings or a safety net for their children. For me, that is the exact price tag of my family's love. I stand here at the kitchen island pouring a glass of vintage Merlot. The wine is dark, almost like blood as it hits the crystal glass. My hand is perfectly steady. You would think I would be shaking. You would think I would be on the floor weeping, because the people who gave me life just admitted they view me as nothing more than a walking bank account. But I am not shaking. I am gripping the stem of this glass so hard I am surprised it has not shattered yet. I look at my reflection in the darkened window. I see a successful 32-year-old woman. I see designer clothes and a posture that screams confidence. But inside, I am tallying the receipts. The student loans I paid off for my sister Nia because she just had to go to a private college she never graduated from. The down payment for the house my parents claimed they needed to avoid homelessness. The luxury car sitting in my brother-in-law's driveway right now. I paid for it all. I bought their affection installment by installment, thinking that if I just wrote one more check, I would finally be worthy of sitting at their table. What a fool I was. On the marble counter in front of me sits my phone. It is silent now. The screen is black. But make no mistake, that device is a bomb. Inside it is the recording that ends my family as we know it. They think I am sitting here crying. They think I am going to call them tomorrow and beg for an explanation. They have no idea that I have spent the last 3 hours not mourning, but calculating. Before I tell you how I legally evicted my entire family from their comfortable lives and watched them scramble for cover, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever realized that your family was your biggest liability. My name is Zuri, and this is how I got a $450,000 refund on my trauma. 3 hours before my world collapsed, I was sitting in my corner office on the 42nd floor. The view of the Chicago skyline usually grounds me, but that afternoon, the gray clouds hanging over the lake felt heavy with unspoken threats. I was deep into a forensic audit for a pharmaceutical client, hunting down a discrepancy that 3 other firms had missed. That is what I do. I find the ugly truths that people try desperately to hide behind rows of neat numbers. My office was silent, except for the rhythmic clicking of my keyboard and the low hum of the server tower beneath my desk. I was in my element, safe in a world of logic and black and white facts. Then my phone vibrated against the mahogany desk. It was a sharp, aggressive buzz that shattered my concentration. I glanced at the screen with a sigh, expecting a client email or a reminder from my assistant. Instead, a notification lit up from the family group chat. My mother had named the group Family Blessings, a title that always felt more like a branding strategy than a reality. Usually, I ignore these notifications during business hours. They are typically requests for money disguised as scripture verses, or photos of my sister Nia living a champagne lifestyle on a beer budget. But this notification was different. It was from Nia, and the preview text made me pause. It read, simply, "Did you guys hear this plan yet?" followed by a laughing face emoji. Below the text was a voice memo file. I looked at the duration. 45 minutes. I frowned and leaned back in my ergonomic chair. Nia never sent voice notes that long. She barely had the attention span for a 30-second video clip, let alone a 45-minute monologue. My thumb hovered over the screen. Why would she send a podcast-length recording to the group chat in the middle of a Tuesday workday? Before I could unlock the phone to investigate, the message vanished. The audio file disappeared and was instantly replaced by the gray systematic text that reads, "This message was deleted." A second later, another notification popped up. "Nia has left the group." My stomach dropped. Not because I was confused, but because my professional instincts kicked in instantly. In my line of work, deleting a file is an admission of guilt. It is the digital equivalent of shredding documents while the police are knocking at the front door. Panic is the only reason people move that fast. Nia had made a mistake, a massive one. She had meant to send that recording to someone else. Maybe her husband Brad, maybe my mother privately. But she had slipped and dropped the weapon right in the middle of the room. What my sister did not know was that my phone is not just a phone. It is a vault. Years ago, after a client tried to wipe his device remotely to hide assets during a divorce case, I installed a mirroring protocol on all my electronics. My phone is synced to a private encrypted cloud server that automatically backs up every single piece of media the exact millisecond it lands on my device. Even if the sender deletes it on their end, it is already immortalized on mine. It is a security measure I set up to protect my business, but today, it was about to protect my sanity. I opened my secure folder on my laptop. There it was. The file was safe. The file name was just a string of numbers, but the caption was still visible in the metadata. "Did you guys hear this plan yet?" I realized then that the surprise was not a gift. It was a scheme. I sat there for a moment, looking at the jagged waveform of the audio file on my high-definition monitor. It looked chaotic and sharp, like teeth waiting to bite. I knew I had a deadline for the pharmaceutical audit. I knew I should get back to the safety of my spreadsheets. But the silence in my office suddenly felt deafening. The air conditioner hummed, but I felt hot. I needed to know what was so important that my sister had to delete it and run. I reached into my drawer and pulled out my noise-canceling headphones. I placed them over my ears, sealing myself off from the city of Chicago, and prepared to listen to the evidence of my own betrayal. I slipped the noise-canceling headphones over my ears, and the hum of the office air conditioning instantly vanished. I was alone in a vacuum of silence for exactly 1 second before I pressed the spacebar on my laptop. The audio file roared to life. The first thing I heard was not a voice, but a sound that was intimately familiar to me. It was the delicate, high-pitched chime of heavy silverware striking fine bone china. Clink, scrape, clink. My stomach tightened. I knew that sound because I had paid for it. 2 years ago, for their 30th anniversary, I had bought my parents a 12-setting service of Wedgwood dinnerware. It cost more than my first car. I remembered how my mother had cried when she opened the box, swearing she would only use them for special occasions. Apparently, a Tuesday night plotting session counted as a special occasion. Then came the laughter. It was loud and raucous, the kind of unrestrained joy that comes from people who do not have a care in the world. My father Desmond's voice boomed through the speakers. "Pass the wine, Patrice. This ribeye is fantastic." I could hear the pour of liquid into a glass. Probably the bottle of Camus I had sent them for Christmas. My mother's voice answered him, and it was dripping with a sweetness I rarely heard directed at me. "Eat up, Des. You know we have to celebrate. The plan worked better than I thought." I leaned closer to the screen, watching the audio waveforms spike as my father spoke again. "Did she suspect anything?" He asked through a mouthful of food. "Did she ask about the doctor?" My mother let out a sharp cackle that made me wince. "Suspect anything? Please, Desmond. Zuri is smart with books, but she is an idiot with people, especially us. All I had to do was use the trigger. I paused the recording for a split second. My hand hovered over the keyboard. The trigger. What trigger? I forced myself to press play again. My mother continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that felt like a physical slap. I just told her she looked thin in her last Instagram post. I said, Zuri honey, have you lost weight? You look so elegant. You know how she is. She is so desperate for a compliment she would sign over her kidney if I told her she was pretty. As soon as I said that, she softened right up. She did not even ask to see the medical bills. She just transferred the money. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hand instinctively went to my stomach. For years I had battled with my body image, and my mother had been the primary architect of that insecurity. She was the one who put me on diets at age 10. She was the one who made comments about my thighs before prom. And now I realized that every compliment she had given me in the last 5 years was not love. It was a transaction code. She knew exactly which buttons to press to open the vault. My father roared with laughter again, banging his fist on the table. The silverware rattled. God bless that girl. She might not be the daughter we wanted to show off at church, but she is definitely the most profitable. Who needs a 401k when you have guilt? She is the best ATM this family ever had. I sat there in my high-rise office, frozen in horror. They clinked their glasses together in a toast. To Zuri, my mother chirped, to the gift that keeps on giving. The audio continued, but for a moment, I could not hear anything over the rushing of blood in my ears. I was not a daughter, I was not a person, I was a financial instrument, and they were eating a steak dinner paid for by my labor while laughing about how easy it was to manipulate me. I looked at the waveform on the screen. There were still 40 minutes left, and I knew with sinking dread that the worst was yet to come. Then the laughter died down and a new voice cut through the static. It was Brad, my brother-in-law, the man who has not held a steady job since 2019, but somehow drives a better car than I do. His voice was slurred slightly, probably from the expensive scotch I had bought for my father. God, she is such a buzzkill, he groaned. I honestly do not know how you grew up in the same house as her, Nia. She is like a bitter old librarian who hates fun. I swear she only works 80 hours a week because she has no one waiting for her at home. She is going to die alone in that penthouse, surrounded by cats and spreadsheets. My jaw tightened until my teeth ached. I looked at the framed photo on my desk. It was a picture of me and Brad at their wedding. I was smiling, genuinely happy for my sister, while he looked bored. I had paid for his tuxedo. I had paid for the open bar he got drunk at. And now here he was, mocking the very work ethic that funded his lifestyle. He was not done yet. You know that $5,000 she sent last week for the emergency plumbing repair, he asked. I held my breath. That money was supposed to fix a burst pipe in their basement. Nia had called me crying, saying the water was destroying the foundation. Brad laughed. I used it to get those matte black rims for the Tesla, and I still had enough left over to upgrade the sound system. You should hear the bass now, babe. It hits harder than your sister's rejection issues. Nia giggled. It was a light, airy sound that used to make me smile. Now it sounded like nails on a chalkboard. Stop it, Brad. Do not be mean, she said. But she was not defending me. She was flirting with him. She is just difficult. But hey, she is family, and you know the rule. Sisters help sisters, especially when one sister is rich and guilt-ridden and the other one has taste. As long as she pays off my Amex bill every month, she can be as grumpy as she wants. She thinks she is saving me. It makes her feel important. Let her have her hero complex while we have the cash. I felt a cold numbness spread through my chest. The hero complex. That was what they called my loyalty. For years, Nia had played the part of the helpless victim. The world was always against her. Her boss was mean. Her car broke down. Her health was fragile. I had stepped in every single time, not because I wanted to be a hero, but because I thought that was what big sisters did. We protect, we provide. I realize now that I was never protecting her from the world. I was subsidizing her refusal to grow up. Brad chimed in again. You are a genius, babe. Seriously, the way you squeezed out that extra $2,000 for the quote-unquote therapy sessions was a masterclass. We should take a trip next month. Maybe Cabo. I bet Zuri would sponsor a mental health retreat for her poor, stressed-out little sister. They both erupted into laughter again, clinking glasses, celebrating their fraud. I sat alone in my office, and for the first time in my life, I saw my sister clearly. She was not fragile. She was a predator. And I was the prey. The recording kept playing, but the dynamic had shifted. I was no longer listening as a hurt sister. I was listening as a forensic accountant who had just found the smoking gun. The recording ended with a sharp click that sounded like a gavel hitting a judge's bench. I slowly slid the headphones off my ears and placed them on the mahogany desk with deliberate precision. The silence that filled my office was heavy, but it was not empty. It was filled with a terrifying clarity. I waited for the tears to come. I waited for the crushing weight of heartbreak to buckle my knees and send me crumbling to the plush carpet. But the tears never came. Instead, I felt a strange cold sensation spreading through my chest. It was the feeling of a heavy burden finally being lifted. For decades, I had been carrying the weight of their expectations and their approval on my back, and now I knew that the load was never real. It was a phantom. I stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window that offered a ghostly reflection against the Chicago night sky. I looked at the woman staring back at me. The old Zuri, the desperate people-pleaser, who would buy her father a steak dinner just to hear him say he was proud of her, died in that chair 5 minutes ago. The woman standing there now was different. Her eyes were dry. Her jaw was set like stone. She was no longer a daughter seeking validation. She was a forensic auditor who had just discovered a massive discrepancy in the books, and she was about to balance the ledger. My phone buzzed on the desk, breaking the trance. It was a direct message from Nia. She must have realized I saw the group message before she deleted it. Panic was setting in on her end. The text popped up on the lock screen. Hey, did you see that weird file I sent by mistake? It was just a butt dial. Hope you are working hard, sis. I stared at the message. The audacity was breathtaking. She was trying to gaslight me one last time. She wanted to see if I was still the gullible fool she could manipulate with a few emojis. My finger hovered over the keyboard. I could have screamed at her. I could have called her and demanded an apology. But in my line of work, you never tip off the suspect before you have the handcuffs ready. You let them think they are safe until the moment you kick down the door. I typed 3 simple words. 3 words that answered her unspoken fear and sealed her fate all at once. In the recording, she had said they only loved my money, so I typed back, "So do I." I hit send and watched the screen. For a moment, the 3 little dots appeared, indicating she was typing a frantic response. Then the dots disappeared. Then her profile picture vanished. Then her status went blank. She had blocked me. Panic does that to people. It makes them run and hide and sever connections, thinking it will save them. I set the phone down and picked up my glass of wine, swirling the dark red liquid. A cold smile touched my lips for the first time that night. They wanted a relationship based on money. Fine. I was about to give them the most expensive financial lesson of their lives. But to understand the brutality of what I did next, you have to understand how they groomed me for this slaughter. You have to go back to the beginning, to the dining room table, where I learned that love was just another bill to be paid. To understand the brutality of the betrayal, you have to go back to a dining room table in Chicago 20 years ago. In our house, Sunday dinner was not just a meal, it was a weekly reminder of the hierarchy. We looked like a picture-perfect family from the outside. My father, Desmond, sat at the head of the table carving the meat, while my mother, Patrice, hummed gospel hymns. but the way the food was distributed told the real story. I remember one evening vividly when I was 10 years old. My father was serving pork chops. He lifted a piece from the skillet that was burnt to a crisp around the edges. The meat was dry and curling away from the bone like old leather. He dropped it onto my plate with a heavy thud without even looking at me. Then he reached back into the pan and picked up the next piece. It was thick, succulent, and glistening with juice. He placed it gently on my sister Nia's plate, like he was handling a rare diamond. I was young, but I knew what unfairness felt like. I looked down at my charred dinner, and then at Nia's perfect meal. I asked my father why she got the good piece. Before he could answer, my mother intervened. She reached across the table and patted my hand. Her touch was not warm, it was firm and condescending. She looked me in the eye and delivered the line that would become the soundtrack of my life. She said, "Zuri, baby, look at you. You are strong. You are built tough, just like your father. You can handle the grit. Nia is different. She is delicate. She is fragile. She needs the nourishment more than you do. Look at her, she is like a little flower that will wilt if we do not water it constantly." I looked across the table at Nia. She was 7 years old. She was not delicate, she was manipulative. She saw the hurt in my eyes and immediately slumped in her chair, letting out a small fake cough that she had perfected to get out of chores. My parents immediately abandoned their meal to coo over her cutting her meat into tiny bite-sized pieces so she would not have to exert herself. I sat there in silence, sawing through dry, tough meat that tasted like ash and swallowed the lesson along with it. That was the day the family constitution was written. Zuri is the provider. Nia is the receiver. Zuri is the granite foundation that exists to be walked on. Nia is the vase that must be placed on a pedestal. That philosophy infected everything we did. If a lamp broke, it was because I was too clumsy and strong. If Nia failed a math test, it was because the teacher was too harsh on her sensitive spirit. I started to believe that my strength was a defect. I thought that because I did not need help, I did not deserve love. I started trying to purchase their affection. I saved my lunch money for weeks, not to buy toys for myself, but to buy my mother expensive chocolates. I remember handing her a box when I was 12, hoping for a hug. She took it and smiled, but then she turned to my sister and said, "Oh, look, Nia. Zuri bought you a treat because she knows you had a hard day." I did not get a thank you. I got the privilege of serving the golden child. I spent the next 2 decades trying to buy a seat at that table, not realizing that the price of admission was my soul. The day the acceptance letter from Northwestern University arrived was supposed to be the proudest moment of my life. The envelope was thick and heavy cream-colored paper that felt like a golden ticket to a better future. I placed it on the kitchen island right next to my father's morning coffee, expecting a hug or a toast, or at least a smile. My father glanced at the university logo and pushed the paper aside like it was junk mail. He took a sip of his coffee and delivered the news without even looking at me. "Zuri, we are proud of you, but we simply cannot finance this. The market is down and money is tight. You are smart. You will figure out scholarships or loans. You always land on your feet." I stood there stunned. I knew for a fact that my parents had a college savings fund. I had seen the bank statements in my father's home office. When I mentioned the account, my mother sighed the way one sighs at a petulant child. "That money is for the family security, Zuri. It is for emergencies. Your education is a luxury, not an emergency. Besides, you are strong enough to carry debt. Some people crumble under pressure, but you thrive in it. Do not be selfish." So I signed the papers. I took on $80,000 in student loans with interest rates that would make a loan shark blush. While my classmates were joining sororities and going to football games, I was rushing from my early morning shift at the campus library to my night shift at a 24-hour diner. I smelled like stale coffee and fryer grease for 4 years. I slept 4 hours a night. I ate leftovers from the diner kitchen. I told myself it was building character. I told myself I was becoming independent. Then came the summer my sister Nia graduated high school. She had barely scraped by with a 2.5 GPA and a folder full of rejection letters from every college she applied to. She did not handle the failure with grace. She threw a tantrum that lasted 3 days, locking herself in her room and refusing to eat. My parents were frantic. They treated her mediocrity like a Greek tragedy that needed to be mourned. One morning I came home from my night shift exhausted, my feet throbbing, and found the hallway filled with Louis Vuitton luggage. My mother was beaming, holding a travel brochure. "We are sending Nia to Europe for the summer," she announced happily. "Paris, Rome, maybe a little time in Greece. She needs to find herself after such a disappointment. She is too fragile to handle rejection without a cushion. The poor thing needs to know the world is still beautiful." I stood there clutching my apron, counting the $40 in tips in my pocket that would barely cover my textbooks for the fall semester. I looked at the price tag of the trip. It cost exactly what my freshman year tuition would have been. You are spending $20,000 on a vacation for the child who failed, but you could not spare a dime for the child who succeeded. My father looked me dead in the eye and said, "Stop being jealous, Zuri. You are capable. Nia needs us." I watched Nia leave for the airport in a limousine, waving like a princess, while I walked to the bus stop to go serve pancakes to strangers. That was the moment I realized that in my family, competence was punished and incompetence was rewarded. Then came the Thanksgiving, where Nia introduced us to Brad. He walked into our living room wearing a wrinkled hoodie and torn jeans, looking like he had just rolled out of bed at noon. If I had worn that to a family holiday dinner, my mother would have sent me to my room to change, but when Brad did it, he was not sloppy, he was eccentric. He was a disruptor. That was the word he used to describe himself within 5 minutes of shaking my father's hand. "I am a serial entrepreneur, Desmond," he said with unearned confidence. "I am currently in the pre-seed phase of a tech startup that is going to revolutionize the way people buy groceries on the blockchain." I sat there sipping my wine and watching the performance. I deal with CEOs and venture capitalists every day. I know what success looks like, and I know what a hustle looks like. Brad was a hustle wrapped in privilege. I asked him a simple question about his revenue model and his burn rate. He blinked and gave a vague answer about focusing on user acquisition over monetization. In the business world, that translates to, "I am unemployed and I have no idea how to make money." But my parents did not hear the emptiness of his words. They only saw his complexion. To my mother and father, Brad was not a broke guy with a pipe dream. He was a status symbol. They looked at his blue eyes and his sandy blonde hair, and they saw an upgrade for the family bloodline. My mother pulled me into the kitchen under the pretense of getting more stuffing, but really she just wanted to gush. "Is he not wonderful, Zuri?" she whispered, squeezing my arm. "He is so intelligent, so modern. And look at how he looks at Nia. Your sister has finally done something right. She is marrying up." I almost choked. Marrying up. Nia was a college dropout working part-time as a receptionist, and Brad was living on a friend's couch while waiting for his big break. But in my parents' eyes, he was the prize, because he offered them proximity to whiteness. They treated him like royalty. My father, who never let anyone touch the remote control, handed it to Brad and asked him what he wanted to watch. My mother, who criticized everything I cooked, fawned over the store, bought pie Brad brought, saying it was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. By the end of the night, the narrative was set. Brad was the visionary genius who just needed a little support to change the world. I was the cynical corporate drone who did not understand his brilliance. My father put his arm around Brad's shoulder and said, "Son, you are going to do great things, and this family is going to support you 100%. He looked pointedly at me when he said it. I realized then that the support he was promising was not emotional. It was financial. And the bank account they intended to draft that support from was mine. They were not just welcoming a son-in-law, they were welcoming a liability, and they expected me to underwrite the insurance policy. The breaking point came 6 months before the wedding during a budget meeting at the Ritz-Carlton. We were sitting in a plush conference room with a wedding planner who charged $500 an hour just to breathe the same air as us. She slid a leather-bound binder across the mahogany table. I opened it to the final page and saw the estimated total, $100,000. I laughed, thinking it was a typo. I looked at my parents, expecting them to be outraged. Instead, they were nodding solemnly. My father leaned forward and pushed the binder toward me. "We need to make a statement, Zuri," he said, his voice low and serious. "Brad comes from old money. His family has expectations. We cannot look like paupers next to them. This wedding represents our family dignity." I stared at him. Dignity. That was rich, coming from a man who was currently asking his daughter to drain her life savings for a party. I closed the binder. "I am not paying this," I said. My voice was calm, but my hands were shaking under the table. "I am happy to pay for the dress and maybe the flowers, but I am not financing a celebrity wedding for an unemployed groom. I am saving for my own condo." The room went silent. My mother looked at me like I had just slapped her. "You are being selfish, Zuri," she hissed. "This is your sister big day. Do you want to humiliate us in front of the in-laws? Do you want them to think we are trash?" I stood up to leave. "I am not doing it, Mom. Figure it out yourselves." That was when the performance began. My mother stood up to stop me but suddenly gasped. Her hand flew to her chest. She let out a moan that was loud enough to alert the staff in the hallway. "My chest," she wheezed. "I cannot breathe." She collapsed into the chair, knocking over a pitcher of water. My father screamed for help. Chaos erupted. The wedding planner was calling 911. Nia was sobbing hysterically, screaming that I had killed our mother. I stood there frozen. Part of me suspected it was theater, but the other part, the terrified daughter part, was paralyzed by guilt. An hour later, we were in the emergency room waiting area. The smell of antiseptic made me nauseous. Dr. Evans came out to see us. He was not just a doctor, he was a deacon at our church and a long-time family friend. He looked at me with disappointment etched into his wrinkles. "Your mother is stable now, but her blood pressure is dangerously high, Zuri," he said, keeping his voice professional but judgmental. "Her heart is fragile. Emotional stress is a silent killer. Whatever you were arguing about, you need to ask yourself if it is worth her life." He let the question hang in the air. He did not know the argument was about a $100,000 party. He just knew that Zuri, the bad daughter, had upset Patrice, the saint. I looked through the glass door at my mother, lying in the hospital bed, hooked up to monitors. She looked small and frail. The guilt crashed over me like a wave. I felt like a murderer. I walked into that hospital room, took my checkbook out of my purse, and signed away my freedom just to make the beeping of the heart monitor stop. The beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound in the private hospital room. It acted like a metronome, counting down the seconds of my resolve. My mother lay in the bed, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. Her skin was ashen, and her breathing was shallow. My father stood by the window, refusing to look at me, his silence acting as a heavy accusation. I sat in the uncomfortable vinyl chair, clutching my purse. The guilt was a physical weight in my chest. Dr. Evans' words about emotional stress being a silent killer replayed in my mind on a loop. I looked at my mother, and for a terrifying moment I actually believed I was killing her. She opened her eyes slowly and reached for my hand. Her grip was weak. "Zuri," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I do not care about the money. I really do not. I just want to see your sister happy. I want our family to be whole. If I go, I want to go knowing there is peace between you two." That was the dagger. She did not ask for the check directly. She framed it as her dying wish. She weaponized her own mortality to get what she wanted. I broke. Tears streamed down my face as I opened my purse and pulled out my checkbook. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the pen. I wrote the date. I wrote the name of the wedding venue. And then I wrote the number, $100,000. I tore the check out of the book. The ripping sound seemed to echo in the quiet room. I placed the check in my mother's hand. "Mom, please get better," I said. "We will pay for the wedding. Just please do not die." The transformation was biblical. The moment the paper touched her skin, the color seemed to return to her cheeks. Her breathing steadied. She squeezed my hand with a strength that was definitely not there 10 seconds ago. She looked at the check, verified the amount, and then smiled at my father. "See, Desmond? I told you she would do the right thing." Within an hour, she was sitting up, eating Jell-O and asking for her makeup bag. By the next morning, she was discharged. The miracle cure was 6 figures, and it cleared my bank account just in time for the deposit deadline. 3 months later, I walked into the ballroom of the Grand Hotel. It was a scene from a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling. Thousands of white orchids covered every surface. It was breathtaking, and it was entirely funded by my life savings. I looked for my seat, assuming as the financier and sister of the bride I would be at the head table. I walked past the dais where Brad and Nia sat on throne-like chairs. I walked past the tables reserved for Brad's family. I kept walking until I reached table 24. It was located in the far back corner, right next to the swinging double doors of the kitchen. Every time a waiter walked out with a tray of fish, the smell wafted over me. I sat there alone, surrounded by distant cousins and friends of friends who did not know who I was. I watched my parents laughing at the front of the room. I watched Nia twirl in her $10,000 custom gown, looking like a princess. Brad stood up to give a toast. He raised a glass of champagne that cost $300 a bottle. "I would like to thank my beautiful wife," he said, his voice booming over the speakers. "And I want to thank God for blessing us with the abundance to celebrate our love and style. We did this our way. The room erupted in applause. He did not thank me. He did not even look at me. I sat by the kitchen door, quietly eating the chicken I had paid for, realizing that I had bought them a dream wedding, and they had not even given me a view of the stage. The honeymoon was supposed to last 2 weeks, but for Nia and Brad, it lasted 2 years. While I was clocking 16-hour shifts in my office under the hum of fluorescent lights, they were living a life that looked like a travel magazine spread. My phone became a window into a paradise I was paying for but was not allowed to visit. I would be sitting at my desk at midnight eating cold tuna out of a can because the cafeteria was closed, scrolling through Instagram to see my sister posing on a yacht in Tulum. Her caption read, "Manifest your dreams and the universe will provide." I knew for a fact the universe had nothing to do with it. The universe was actually a wire transfer from my savings account that I had sent 3 days earlier because Brad claimed his crypto wallet was temporarily frozen. They became masters of the financial emergency. It was never a request for luxury. It was always a crisis. They needed $5,000 because the transmission on Brad's car blew out. 2 days later, I saw a photo of Brad wearing a new Rolex Submariner. When I zoomed in on the photo, I could see the price tag reflected in his sunglasses. They needed $3,000 because Nia had a dental emergency that insurance would not cover. The next week, she posted a haul video showing off 3 new designer handbags. They were not just spending my money. They were flaunting it in my face, daring me to call them out. And every time I tried to speak up, my mother was there to act as their defense attorney. I remember calling her one night, exhausted and on the verge of tears. I told her that I could not pay my own electric bill because I had just covered Nia's rent again. I told her it was unfair that they were eating at Michelin-star restaurants while I was eating vending machine crackers. I expected sympathy. I expected her to be outraged on my behalf. Instead, her voice turned ice cold. She asked me if I was hearing myself. She said I sounded bitter. She asked if I was jealous of my sister's happiness because I was 30 years old and sleeping alone. That accusation hit me harder than the financial loss. Jealousy. Was I jealous? Maybe I was. Not of their money because it was actually my money, but of their freedom. I was jealous of the way they could move through the world without consequences. I was jealous that they could be irresponsible and selfish and still be loved while I had to be perfect and generous just to be tolerated. My mother twisted the knife deeper. She told me that Brad was a visionary and that entrepreneurs often struggle in the beginning. She said I was investing in the family legacy. She made me feel like a predator for asking to be paid back. So I stopped asking. I kept working. I kept signing checks. I kept enabling their delusion because I was too tired to fight a war on two fronts. I did not know it then, but this exhaustion was exactly where they wanted me. They were wearing me down systematically, weakening my defenses, so that when the big lie came, the one about the ancestral home, I would be too tired to ask the right questions. The call that sealed my fate came at 2:14 in the morning. My phone vibrated against the nightstand, sounding like a drill in the dead silence of my apartment. I fumbled for it, my heart pounding in my chest the way it always does when you get a call in the middle of the night. It was my father. Desmond never called me after 9 in the evening. I slid the answer button across the screen, expecting to hear news of a car accident or a death. Instead, I heard a sound that terrified me more than any siren. My father was sobbing. It was not a quiet cry. It was a jagged, desperate heaving that sounded like his lungs were collapsing. "Zuri," he gasped between breaths. "It is over. We are losing everything." I sat up in bed, instantly awake. I asked him what was happening. I asked if Mom was okay. He told me it was worse than sickness. It was homelessness. He told me that their landlord, Mr. Henderson, had decided to sell the house they had been renting for 15 years. He claimed that developers were coming in to tear it down and build condos. He said they had 30 days to vacate the premises. I tried to be rational. I told him we could find them a nice apartment. I told him moving might be a good thing since the house was old and drafty. But he cut me off with a wail that made my stomach turn. "You do not understand, Zuri," he cried. "This is your mother's home. Her memories are here. Her garden is here. If I take her out of this house, it will kill her. Her heart cannot take the stress of moving. Do you want to be responsible for putting your mother in an early grave?" There it was again, the weaponization of my mother's health. He told me there was only one way to save them. Mr. Henderson had given them the first right of refusal. If they could come up with the cash to buy the property outright, he would sell it to them instead of the developers. I asked how much. The line went silent for a moment. Then he whispered the number. $300,000. I felt the air leave the room. $300,000 was my entire investment portfolio. It was the down payment for my own dream home. It was my freedom fund. I started to stutter, trying to explain that I could not just liquidate that kind of cash. My father's voice changed instantly from sorrow to anger. "So you are going to let us live on the street," he accused. "You are sitting in that ivory tower in the city hoarding your money while the people who raised you are about to be homeless. This house is your legacy, Zuri. We are trying to save it for you. When we are gone, this house will be yours. We are doing this for your future." I sat in the dark, listening to my father beg. He played every card in the deck. He talked about the height chart on the kitchen door frame. He talked about the tree in the backyard where I used to swing. He painted a picture of a family heritage that needed to be preserved at all costs. I was exhausted. I was guilt-ridden. And I was desperate to make the crying stop. I told him to stop crying. I told him I would see what I could do. I hung up the phone and stared at the wall. I did not know it then, but Mr. Henderson had not sold the building. In fact, Mr. Henderson had died 2 years ago, and the house was under a rent control agreement that meant they could never be evicted. The entire story was a fabrication designed to extract the maximum amount of capital from my accounts. And in my sleep-deprived state, I was walking right into the trap. The next morning, Brad was waiting in the lobby of my office building. He was wearing a suit, which was the first red flag I should have noticed, because Brad usually treated sweatpants as formal wear. He was holding a leather portfolio and pacing back and forth with the manic energy of a Wall Street trader. I was running on 2 hours of sleep and 3 shots of espresso. My eyes felt like they were filled with sand, and my brain was struggling to process basic sentences, let alone complex legal documents. When he saw me, he rushed over and shoved a stack of papers into my hands before I could even say hello. "Look, Zuri. I know this is sudden," he said, his voice breathless and urgent. "But I stayed up all night running the numbers. Mr. Henderson is not just selling the house, he is liquidating his entire portfolio. This is a distressed asset sale. If we do not move on this by noon, the developers are going to bulldoze the place." He opened the portfolio and pointed to a purchase agreement. It looked legitimate. It had the logo of a well-known real estate law firm at the top. It had stamps and signatures and notarized seals. It was a masterpiece of forgery, but in my exhausted state, it just looked like a terrifying deadline. I tried to read the fine print. I really did. I am a forensic accountant. Reading contracts is what I do. But the words were swimming on the page. Brad kept talking over me, interrupting my train of thought with a barrage of financial buzzwords he had probably memorized from a YouTube video. He talked about bridge loans and equity positions and market cap rates. He used terms that sounded smart, but meant absolutely nothing in this context. "Zuri, we are looking at an immediate appreciation of value," he insisted. "Think of this as a diversified investment. You are not just saving mom and dad, you are acquiring a tangible asset. I am handling the logistics and the closing costs. I just need you to provide the liquidity." I rubbed my temples trying to focus. Something felt off. The font on the deed looked slightly different than the font on the signature page. A tiny alarm bell rang in the back of my mind. I started to ask a question about the title insurance. Brad cut me off instantly. "Zuri, look at me. Dad called me this morning. He was hyperventilating. Mom is packing boxes right now, crying her eyes out. Do you really want to debate font sizes while your parents are terrified of being homeless? Just sign the papers. Be the hero they need." That was the kill shot. Be the hero. He knew I was addicted to fixing things. He knew I could not stand the idea of my parents suffering. I looked at his face. He looked sincere. He looked worried. I did not know then that he was actually suppressing a smile because he was about to pull off the heist of the century. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. My hand hovered over the transfer button. $300,000. It was everything I had. It was my safety net. It was my future. I looked at Brad one last time. "This is for mom and dad, right?" I asked. He nodded vigorously. "Every penny, Zuri. I am just the facilitator." I took a deep breath and let the air out slowly. I authorized the transfer. The screen flashed green. Transaction successful. $300,000 vanished from my account in a nanosecond. Brad watched the screen over my shoulder, and the moment the confirmation appeared, he snatched the papers back from my hand. "You did the right thing, Zuri," he said, patting my shoulder. "You really saved us." He turned and walked out of the lobby with a bounce in his step, leaving me standing there with an empty bank account and a pit in my stomach that was starting to feel a lot like nausea. The moment the notification on my phone confirmed the wire transfer was complete, I expected a celebration. I expected my mother to cry tears of joy and my father to finally tell me he was proud. I expected a family dinner where I would sit at the head of the table as the savior who rescued the family legacy. But none of that happened. The only response I got was a text message from my father 3 hours later. It was 2 words long. "Received, thanks." No heart emoji, no exclamation point. Just a dry acknowledgement of a transaction that cost me my entire future. I tried to rationalize it. I told myself they were just exhausted from the stress. I told myself they were busy dealing with the lawyers and the paperwork. But as the days turned into weeks, the silence from my family became deafening. Before the transfer, my phone would ring 5 times a day. My mother would call to update me on every minor detail of her life, from the weather to the neighbor's dog. Now my phone sat on my desk like a brick. When I called them, the conversations were short and strained. My mother, who used to talk for hours, suddenly had a million excuses to get off the line. I cannot talk right now, Zuri, she would say, her voice sounding distant and annoyed. The contractors are here. There is dust everywhere. It is a madhouse. When I offered to come over and help with the packing or the renovations, she panicked. No, absolutely not, she insisted. It is dangerous. There are nails on the floor and open paint cans. You have your asthma. Stay in the city. We will invite you over when it is perfect. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that they were just trying to protect me. But a cold knot of suspicion started to form in my stomach. It was the same feeling I get when I'm auditing a company and the numbers on the balance sheet do not quite add up. I started noticing little inconsistencies. My father mentioned they were repainting the living room blue, but 2 days later my mother complained about the new yellow wallpaper. When I asked about the closing date for the sale, they gave me vague answers about delays at the county clerk's office. I sat in my office late one night staring at the framed photo of us from Nia's wedding. The smiles looked genuine, but now they felt like a mask. I realized that for the last month I had not been treated like a daughter. I had been treated like a lender who had already paid out the loan. There was no need to court me anymore. There was no need to be nice. They had the cash, and now I was just a nuisance who asked too many questions. I tried to push the thought away. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that my family would never stoop so low as to swindle me. But deep down in the part of my brain that detects fraud for a living, I knew something was wrong. I just was not ready to admit that the people I loved most in the world were the best con artists I had ever met. The silence in my penthouse was no longer empty. It was charged with the static electricity of imminent justice. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. It is a custom-built machine designed for heavy data processing, the kind of tool that can strip a corporation's finances naked in under an hour. For the last month, I had been paralyzed by doubt, but now I was fueled by the cold, hard certainty of the recording. I was done being Zuri the daughter. It was time to unleash Zuri the forensic accountant. I logged into the banking portal. Because I had co-signed the loan for the house, I had full administrative access to the mortgage documents and the payment history. My parents thought my signature was just a formality, a necessary evil to get the cash. They forgot that a co-signer is also an owner. I typed in my credentials and watched the two-factor authentication code ping my phone. I entered it, and the digital gates swung open. The screen filled with rows of black and white data. Most people see numbers as abstract concepts, but to me they are a language. They tell stories. They reveal intent. I navigated to the wire transfer history, dating back to the day I sent the $300,000. There it was, a massive debit leaving my savings account. I clicked on the transaction ID to expand the metadata. This is where amateurs get caught. They think money just disappears into a hole, but money always leaves a trail. It leaves footprints in the snow of the banking system. I traced the routing number of the recipient. The paperwork Brad had shown me claimed the money was going to a trust account held by Mr. Henderson, the landlord. But when I cross-referenced the routing number with the federal banking database, it did not point to a real estate trust. It pointed to a business checking account at a small regional bank in Delaware. Delaware is where you go when you want to hide who owns a company. I pulled up the corporate registry for Delaware. My fingers flew across the keyboard, executing search commands with the speed of a concert pianist. I searched for the entity attached to that bank account. It was a limited liability company called Future Tech Ventures. I froze. Future Tech Ventures. That was the name of the imaginary startup Brad had been blathering about for 3 years. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The money never went to the landlord. The house was never for sale. My parents had conspired with Brad to funnel my life savings directly into his personal slush fund. I felt a laugh bubbling up in my throat. It was a dark, jagged sound. They had not just stolen from me. They had been lazy about it. They used a shell company with a name so obvious a first-year audit student could have cracked it. I opened a new window and started pulling the monthly statements for Future Tech Ventures. Since I was the guarantor on the loan that funded this account, I had a legal right to see where the capital was being deployed. I clicked download on the PDF files. The progress bar crawled across the screen. 90%, 99%, complete. I opened the first file, and what I saw made my blood run cold. It was not business expenses. It was a catalog of pure hedonistic greed. The PDF document loaded on my screen, and the first line item made my stomach turn. I expected to see expenses for server space or software development, or maybe even legal fees for a legitimate patent filing. Instead, I saw a $4,000 charge at a luxury resort in Cabo San Lucas, dated 2 days after I wired the money. Below that was a transaction for a leased Tesla Model S. Then came the high-end audio equipment, the designer clothes, and thousands of dollars in transfers to a cryptocurrency exchange platform that has since been flagged by the SEC for fraud. There was no technology. There was no venture. There was just my $300,000 being treated like a personal lottery win. I needed to be absolutely sure. In my line of work, assumptions are dangerous, so I needed to verify the physical existence of this company. Brad had always talked about his office space in the tech district, implying he was rubbing shoulders with the city's innovators. I copied the registered business address from the top of the bank statement. 482 West Sycamore Street, Suite B. It sounded professional. It sounded like a place where business was conducted. I opened a satellite mapping tool and typed in the coordinates. The map zoomed in, flying over the digital rooftops of the city. I watched as it bypassed the downtown financial district entirely. It flew past the tech hubs and the CO working spaces. It kept going until it reached a dilapidated strip mall on the far south side of the city. I switched to Street View and zoomed in on the storefronts. There was no glass-walled office building. There was no sleek lobby. Suite B was a narrow storefront sandwiched between a liquor store and a check-cashing place. The sign above the door did not say Future Tech Ventures. It was a faded yellow sign that read, Quick Wash Coin Laundry. I sat back in my chair and let out a breath I did not know I was holding. A laundromat. My life savings had been funneled into a shell company, registered to a coin-operated laundry facility in a bad neighborhood. It was the oldest trick in the book. Brad had likely paid the owner a few $100 to use the mailbox as a corporate address to make his shell company look legitimate on paper. The realization was complete. The landlord, Mr. Henderson, never sold the house. My parents were never being evicted. The entire crisis was a meticulously scripted play designed to panic me into liquidating my assets. They knew that if they asked for money for Brad's startup, I would have said no and asked for a business plan. But by threatening my mother's housing security, they bypassed my logical brain and targeted my heart. They laundered my money through a laundromat address, and they were probably laughing about the irony while driving the car I paid for. I looked at the timestamp on the bank statement again. The funds were almost gone. In less than 6 months, Brad had burned through nearly all of it, leaving just enough to keep the lights on and the lie alive. I saved the document to my encrypted drive. I now had the smoking gun, but I was not done yet. I needed to see exactly what they bought with the wreckage of my future. I needed to see where they were really living. I needed to see the physical evidence of the betrayal. I walked out of my office and got into my car driving south toward the neighborhood where I grew up. My father had claimed they were being evicted. He said the landlord was selling the property and they had to leave immediately unless I provided the cash. If that were true, the house should be empty. It should be dark. There should be a for sale sign on the lawn. I turned onto the familiar cracked pavement of 42nd Street. My heart was pounding against my ribs. As I approached the small bungalow, the truth hit me like a physical slap. The house was not empty. The lights were on. My father's rusted sedan was parked in the driveway in the exact same spot it had occupied for 20 years. Through the front window, I could see the blue flicker of the television. I pulled over and watched. I saw my mother walk past the window, carrying a basket of laundry. She was not packing boxes. She was not in distress. She was living her life exactly as she always had. The eviction was a lie. The desperate midnight phone call was a performance. They were still living in the drafty, peeling rental home that they claimed was killing them. But if they were here, where was my $300,000? I looked at the spreadsheet on my laptop again. Among the frivolous spending, I found a recurring payment for homeowners association fees at an address in Silver Creek. Silver Creek is a gated community 20 miles north of the city where the houses start at $1 million. I put the car in gear and drove. 40 minutes later, I was idling outside a massive wrought iron gate. I used the gate code I found on a delivery invoice in the bank records. The heavy gates swung open, and I entered a world of manicured lawns and fountains. I drove slowly until I found the address. It was a sprawling white colonial mansion with pillars in the front and a 3-car garage. And there, sitting in the driveway, was the brand new matte black Tesla Model S. The license plate frame read Future Tech. I parked down the street and watched. The front door opened and my sister Nia walked out. She was wearing a silk robe and holding a glass of wine. Brad followed her, laughing and wrapping his arms around her waist. They looked like royalty. They were living in a mansion bought with my sweat and tears. And then the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. My parents did not steal the money to improve their own lives. They were still living in that run-down rental. They stole the money to buy this life for Nia. The realization was more painful than the theft itself. My parents were willing to live in squalor just so their golden child could live in luxury. They were martyrs for her and predators to me. They accepted their suffering as long as Nia was happy, and they accepted my exploitation as the necessary cost of doing business. I looked at the mansion one last time. It was beautiful. It was expensive, and it belonged to me. I put the car in drive and headed home. I was not going to confront them yet. I had one more stop to make. I needed to visit the bank that held the mortgage on this palace, because if I paid for it, I should own the debt that came with it. I drove back to my penthouse with my mind racing, but my hands steady on the wheel. Seeing the mansion was one thing, but understanding the mechanics of how they acquired it was another. I needed to see the bones of the deal. I needed to know if they owned that house, or if the house owned them. As soon as I walked through my front door, I went straight to my workstation and pulled up the county property records. In the United States, real estate transactions are public record if you know where to look, and I know exactly where to look. I searched the address of the Silver Creek mansion. The deed popped up instantly. It was listed under Future Tech Ventures, LLC. So technically, my sister and her husband were tenants in a house owned by a company that was funded entirely by my stolen savings. But then I looked at the lien section. This is where the truth usually hides. I expected to see a standard mortgage, maybe even a manageable one considering how much cash I had unknowingly contributed. Instead, what I saw made me gasp. The property was leveraged to the hilt. There was a primary mortgage for 80% of the value, which was standard. But 3 months after closing, there was a second filing, a home equity line of credit, or HELOC. Brad had borrowed against the equity of the house almost immediately. He had drained every cent of value out of the property before the paint was even dry on the walls. I tracked the disbursement of that second loan. It did not go into renovations. It did not go into a savings account. It went straight into a high-risk cryptocurrency exchange. I pulled up the historical charts for the coins Brad had bet on. It was a bloodbath. He had bought at the peak of the market thinking he was a genius, and then watched the value plummet by 70% in a matter of weeks. He had taken the roof over my sister's head and gambled it away on digital tokens that were now worth less than the electricity used to mine them. But the stupidity of his investment was not the most critical part. The most critical part was the payment status. I accessed the loan servicing portal using the credentials I had cracked earlier. The screen was a sea of red ink. The status column for the primary mortgage read past due. The status for the HELOC read default. Brad had not made a single payment to the bank in 90 days. In the world of finance, 90 days is the kill zone. It is the moment when the bank stops sending polite letters asking for payment and starts drafting legal foreclosure documents. I stared at the screen. My parents thought they were living in the lap of luxury. They thought they had secured a legacy. In reality, they were squatting in a house of cards that was seconds away from collapsing. The bank was already preparing a notice of default. Any day now, a sheriff would show up to tape a seizure notice to that beautiful mahogany front door. Most people would panic at this discovery. Most sisters would rush to call their family and offer to bail them out one last time to save them from public humiliation. But I did not panic. I leaned back in my chair and felt a cold calm settle over me. This was not a tragedy. This was an opportunity. If the bank was desperate to get this toxic asset off their books, then they needed a buyer. And I knew exactly who that buyer should be. The predator was about to become the landlord. I did not go to sleep that night. Instead, I poured myself a fresh cup of black coffee and picked up the phone. It was 3 in the morning, but my lawyer Marcus is the kind of attorney who sleeps with his phone under his pillow because he knows that in our line of work, the most profitable disasters happen in the dark. He answered on the second ring, his voice groggy but alert. I told him I needed a new LLC formed immediately. I told him I wanted it expedited, filed in Delaware, and completely anonymous. He asked me for the name. I looked out the window at the city lights, thinking about the goddess of divine retribution who punishes those guilty of hubris. Nemesis Holdings, I said. Marcus paused. He knows me well enough to know that I do not start companies for fun. He asked what the objective was. I told him the objective was acquisition. Specifically, the acquisition of a distressed debt portfolio attached to a residential property in Silver Creek. I gave him the loan number for Brad and Nia's mortgage. I told him to draft a purchase offer for the bank first thing in the morning. I was going to buy the note. For those who do not speak finance, let me explain what this means. When a bank holds a bad loan like the one Brad had stopped paying, they panic. They want to get rid of it because it looks bad on their balance sheet. If a third-party investor comes along and offers to buy that debt for cash, even at a discount, the bank usually says yes. Once I bought that debt, I would no longer be Zuri the sister. I would be Zuri the lender. I would step into the shoes of the bank. I would have the legal right to collect payment, to charge interest, and most importantly, to foreclose on the property if they failed to pay. And I knew for a fact they could not pay. I spent the next few hours liquidating my remaining assets. It was terrifying. I sold my stock portfolio. I cashed out my emergency bonds. I scraped together every cent I had left in the world to raise the capital for this purchase. It was a gamble. If this went wrong, I would be broke. But if it went right, I would hold the deed to their destruction in my hands. I was doubling down on my own vengeance. By sunrise, the paperwork was drafted. Nemesis Holdings was born. It was a ghost entity with no face and no history, just a pile of cash and a mandate to collect. I signed the documents digitally, my hand hovering over the enter key for a split second. This was the point of no return. Once I sent this offer, I was declaring war. There would be no family dinners after this, no Christmas cards, no reconciliation. I was crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. I thought about my mother laughing on that recording. I thought about my father eating the steak I paid for. I thought about Nia living in a mansion while I ate tuna. I pressed the key. The offer was sent. I was not going to save them. I was going to own them. At 9 o'clock sharp, I walked into the glass-walled office of the senior risk officer at First City Bank. His name was Mr. Sterling, and he looked exactly like the kind of man who loses sleep over bad debt. He was reviewing a file on his desk, rubbing his temples when his assistant ushered me in. I was not Zuri the daughter, or Zuri the victim today. I was the authorized representative of Nemesis Holdings. I wore my sharpest blazer and carried nothing but a tablet. I did not shake his hand. I simply sat down and placed the tablet on the desk. Mr. Sterling looked up surprised by my directness. He started to give me the standard corporate greeting, but I cut him off. Mr. Sterling. I know you are busy, so let us skip the pleasantries, I said, keeping my voice level and professional. You have a non-performing asset on your books that is dragging down your quarterly compliance ratios. The property in Silver Creek. The borrower is 90 days delinquent and counting. You are looking at a messy foreclosure process that will take at least 6 months in this jurisdiction. You will have to pay legal fees, maintenance costs, and property taxes while the asset sits empty and depreciates. Or you can sell the note to my firm today for cash and clear this headache off your desk by lunch. He blinked, taken aback by my intimate knowledge of the situation. He adjusted his glasses and looked at the file again. You are referring to the Future Tech Ventures loan, he said cautiously. It is a problematic account, yes, but we are preparing to initiate foreclosure proceedings. We believe we can recover the full value of the asset. I laughed, a short, dry sound that made him flinch. You and I both know that is not true, I countered. The market in Silver Creek has cooled. That house was appraised at the peak of the bubble. If you foreclose, you will be lucky to get 70 cents on the dollar at auction, and that is after you spend $50,000 on lawyers to evict the current occupants. My firm is offering you 80 cents on the dollar, immediate wire transfer. No contingencies, no inspections. We take the paper, and the problem becomes ours. I saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. He was a banker. He cared about numbers, not people. He looked at the red ink on his ledger, and then he looked at the certainty in my face. He typed a few keys on his computer, probably checking to see if my proof of funds was legitimate. When he saw the balance available in the Nemesis Holdings account, his posture relaxed. He leaned back in his chair, and a small relieved smile appeared. It is highly irregular to move this fast, he said, tapping his pen on the desk. But given the borrower's complete lack of communication and the deteriorating nature of the asset, we might be amenable to a sale. If you can wire the funds by noon, we can sign the assignment of mortgage today. I did not smile. I did not celebrate. I simply nodded. Send the wiring instructions to my attorney, I said, standing up. You will have your money within the hour. I walked out of that bank feeling lightheaded. It was done. I had just bought my own family's debt. I was no longer their safety net. I was their creditor. The house they were sleeping in, the walls they were hanging pictures on the roof they thought protected them, it all belonged to me now. They were living in my cage, and they did not even know I held the key. I stepped out into the bright sunlight of the city street and checked my watch. It was time to initiate the collection process. But first, I was going to let them enjoy one last weekend of ignorance before I pulled the rug out from under their feet. Owning the debt was the first nail in the coffin, but I wanted to make sure the lid was nailed shut tight. I knew Brad was a financial fraud, but my gut told me his deception did not stop at bank accounts. Men who feel entitled to other people's money usually feel entitled to other people's bodies too. I decided that financial ruin was not enough for my sister. I needed to shatter the illusion of her perfect marriage. I needed to prove that the prince she thought she stole from the world was actually a frog that I had been paying for. I hired a private investigator named Vance. He was expensive and discreet, the kind of man who used to be a cop until he realized there was more money in divorce settlements. I gave him Brad's name, the license plate of the Tesla, and the address of the office that was actually a laundromat. I told him to find out where Brad went when he claimed he was having late-night strategy meetings with investors. It took Vance exactly 3 days to bring me the results. We met in a parked car on the roof of a parking garage downtown. It felt like a cliché from a noir movie, but Vance preferred privacy. He handed me a thick manila envelope without saying a word. I opened it and pulled out a stack of high-resolution photographs. The first photo showed Brad walking out of a boutique hotel in the trendy West Loop district. He was not alone. Walking beside him was a woman who looked nothing like Nia. She was young, maybe 22, with platinum blonde hair and wearing a dress that cost more than my first car. I flipped to the next photo. Brad was leaning in close, whispering something in her ear. In the next one, his hand was resting possessively on her lower back. And in the final photo, they were kissing in the front seat of the Tesla. The same Tesla that was leased under the company name I was financing. I felt a surge of nausea, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, vindictive satisfaction. My sister had spent years bragging about her husband's loyalty. She had pitied me for being single, telling me that one day I might find a love as pure as hers, and all this time her pure love was using my money to book suites at the Ritz-Carlton for his mistress. Vance cleared his throat and handed me a sheet of paper. "This is the credit card activity," he said. He used the corporate Amex for the room service and the champagne. He listed her as an independent contractor on the company payroll. Her title is listed as executive assistant, but she has no employment history and no office. I looked at the receipts. Brad was not just cheating, he was expensing his affair to the company. He was literally using the capital I gave him to save my parents' house to finance his infidelity. It was so brazen, it was almost impressive. I thanked Vance and wrote him a check. As I drove away with the envelope on the passenger seat, I felt like I was carrying a grenade. This was the nuclear option. If the foreclosure did not destroy Nia, this envelope certainly would. I decided I would not release it yet. I would keep it in my back pocket. I wanted to watch them lose the house first. I wanted to strip them of their shelter and their status before I stripped them of their love. I wanted them to be cold and homeless when they found out their marriage was a lie. The audacity of my family truly knew no bounds. 2 days after I legally purchased their debt and secured the evidence of Brad's infidelity, a courier arrived at my penthouse door. He was holding a package wrapped in silk ribbon. I signed for it, assuming it was a document from my lawyer or perhaps the final paperwork from the bank. I cut the ribbon and opened the box to find an invitation that weighed as much as a brick. It was encased in heavy crushed velvet cardstock with the letters B and N intertwined in gold foil embossing. I opened the card and read the script, which was printed in an elegant calligraphy font. "Please join us for an evening of elegance as we christen the new estate of Brad and Nia. The theme is black tie and brilliance. Help us celebrate the fruits of our hard work and the beginning of our legacy." I had to read the line about the fruits of their hard work 3 times just to make sure I was not hallucinating. The only thing they had worked hard at was fraud. The only fruit they had harvested was the cash from my savings account. They were throwing a party to celebrate a house they did not own, paid for with money they did not earn in a mansion that was already technically in foreclosure. The invitation included a link to a gift registry. I clicked it out of morbid curiosity. They were asking for crystal vases, espresso machines, and a $4,000 robotic lawnmower. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Nia. "I hope you got the invite, sis. It is going to be the event of the season. Mom and Dad are so excited. Please try not to wear something too corporate, okay? We want the photos to look chic. Also, Brad says, if you could come a little early to help set up the catering, that would be great. We want everything to be perfect for the investors he invited." I stared at the screen. She was asking the woman she robbed to come early and work as unpaid staff at a party celebrating the robbery. A normal person would have screamed. A normal person would have driven over there and burned the house down. But I was past anger. I was in a state of cold calculation. They wanted me to be there. They wanted me to witness their triumph. They wanted me to stand in the corner and envy their success while they toasted with champagne I paid for. They had no idea that they were inviting the executioner to their own funeral. I picked up the heavy velvet card and ran my finger over the gold foil. It was a beautiful invitation. It would make a perfect coaster for the drink I planned to have while I watched their world burn. I typed a reply to Nia. "I will be there. I would not miss it for the world." I did not mention the catering. I did not mention the dress code. I walked into my closet and pushed aside the gray corporate suits. I reached for a dress I had bought years ago and never wore. It was red. Blood red. the color of warning, the color of debt, the color of revenge. I was going to that party not as a guest, but as the landlord coming to collect the rent. And the currency I demanded was going to be their humiliation. I stood in my walk-in closet staring at the red dress I had initially selected. It was beautiful and vibrant, screaming for attention. But as I ran my hand over the silk, I realized it was the wrong choice. Red is the color of passion and anger. It is the color of a woman who is hurt. Tonight, I was not hurt. I was indifferent. I was not going there to make a scene, I was going there to close a deal. I pushed the red dress aside and reached for the garment bag at the very back of the rack. I unzipped the bag and revealed the suit I had ordered from a tailor on Savile Row. It was pitch black, the kind of black that seems to absorb all the light in the room. It was cut from Italian wool with a silk lapel sharp enough to cut glass. It was not a party outfit. It was a power suit. It was the kind of thing you wear to a board meeting where you fire the CEO, or the kind of thing you wear to a funeral. In a way, tonight was both. I slipped into the trousers and they fit like a second skin. I buttoned the jacket and looked at my silhouette. There was no softness. There were no frills. I looked like a blade. I sat at my vanity and pulled my hair back into a severe tight bun. I wanted my face to be completely exposed. I wanted them to look into my eyes and see exactly who they were dealing with. I picked up a tube of lipstick. The shade was called Oxblood. It was a deep dark red, almost black. I applied it with surgical precision, outlining my lips until they looked like a wound. I stared at my reflection. The Zuri who used to beg for approval was gone. The woman looking back at me was cold, efficient, and terrifyingly calm. I walked over to my desk and picked up the envelope. It was not a gift card or a toaster. It was a thick manila folder containing the deed to the house, the foreclosure notice from Nemesis Holdings, and the photos of Brad with his mistress. I weighed it in my hand. It felt heavy. It felt like justice. I placed it inside my structured leather clutch. Nia had asked me to come early to help set up. She asked me to serve the guests. I would serve them all right. I would serve them the truth on a silver platter. I put on my stiletto heels. The click-clack sound they made on the marble floor echoed like gunshots. I checked my phone one last time. No messages. Just the time. 7 o'clock. The curtain was about to rise. I took a deep breath, not to calm my nerves, but to savor the oxygen in the room before I sucked it all out. I looked at the empty apartment and whispered a single word to the silence. Showtime. The bass from the sound system was vibrating through the chassis of my car before I even turned off the engine. I sat in the driveway of the Silver Creek mansion, watching the strobe lights flicker through the sheer curtains of the second-floor windows. It looked like a nightclub had vomited inside a suburban estate. The driveway was lined with luxury cars, most of them likely leased or rented for the night, to maintain the illusion of wealth. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror one last time. My lipstick was still perfect. My eyes were still cold. I opened the door and stepped out onto the pavement. The valet, a young kid in an ill-fitting vest, rushed over to take my keys. He looked at my sensible sedan, and then at the line of Porsches and Mercedes behind me with a confused expression. I handed him the fob and a $20 bill. "Keep it close," I told him. "I will not be staying long." He nodded and drove my car away, leaving me standing at the foot of the stairs. I looked up at the massive double doors. Technically, I owned those doors. I owned the concrete steps I was walking on. I owned the roof that was currently vibrating with bad techno music. It gave me a strange sense of vertigo to walk into a house that belonged to me but was filled with strangers who thought I was a guest. I pushed the doors open, and the noise hit me like a physical wave. The foyer was packed with people holding champagne flutes. The air smelled of expensive perfume and desperate ambition. I walked in and the crowd seemed to part instinctively. Maybe it was the black suit. Maybe it was the way I walked with the heavy, confident stride of a woman who has nothing to lose. I saw heads turn. I saw people whisper behind their hands. They were probably wondering who the Grim Reaper in the bespoke suit was and why she looked like she was about to conduct a funeral service in the middle of a housewarming party. Then I saw her. Nia came bounding down the grand staircase holding a glass of rosé. She was wearing a white sequined dress that caught the light like a disco ball. She looked radiant and manic at the same time, the way people look when they are trying too hard to convince everyone they are happy. She spotted me near the entrance, and her face lit up with a smile that did not reach her eyes. It was the smile of a predator seeing prey. "Zuri, you made it!" She shrieked over the music, rushing over to give me a hug that felt more like a frisk. I stood stiffly in her embrace, my arms at my sides. She pulled back and looked me up and down, her nose wrinkling slightly. "Wow, look at you. You look so serious. Did you come straight from a funeral, or is this just your new vibe?" She laughed, a high-pitched sound that grated on my nerves. Before I could answer, her eyes darted to my empty hands and then to the small clutch under my arm. Her smile faltered just a fraction. "Where is the gift?" she asked, her voice dropping the sugary act for a split second. "You did bring a gift, right? Brad really wants that espresso machine." I stared at her. The audacity was breathtaking. She was standing in a house I paid for wearing clothes I essentially bought, asking me where her tribute was. I adjusted the clutch under my arm, feeling the weight of the foreclosure notice inside. "I brought something much better than an espresso machine, Nia." I said, my voice low and steady, cutting through the noise. "I brought you a reality check." She blinked, confused by my tone, but before she could ask what I meant, a waiter walked by with a tray of appetizers. She got distracted instantly. "Oh, grab a crab cake, Zuri," she chirped, pointing to the tray. "They are imported. Enjoy yourself, but do not get too comfortable. We need to take family photos in 10 minutes. She swirled away into the crowd, leaving me standing there with a shark-like grin on my face. She wanted a gift. She was going to get one she would never forget. The moment Nia swirled away, the vultures descended. I call them vultures, but technically they are my extended family. Aunts, uncles, and distant cousins who I only see at weddings and funerals surrounded me in a suffocating semicircle of judgment. They held plates piled high with shrimp and cheap cheese, scanning my face for cracks in the armor. Aunt Linda was the first to strike. She is a woman who has been married 4 times, but still feels qualified to give relationship advice. She poked my arm with a manicured nail that felt like a talon. "Zuri, you are looking very sharp," she said, her voice dripping with passive-aggressive sweetness. "But tell me, honey, why are you wearing black? You look like you are in mourning. You should wear bright colors like your sister. Men like color. Maybe if you dressed a little softer, you would not be standing here all alone." I did not answer. I just took a slow, deliberate sip of the lukewarm white wine I had grabbed from a passing tray. The silence made her uncomfortable, but she pressed on. "You know time is ticking, Zuri. Your career is impressive, I suppose, but does it keep you warm at night? Look at Nia. She barely worked a day in her life, and look at what she has achieved. A beautiful home, a wealthy husband. She played her cards right. You could learn a thing or two from her about prioritizing what really matters." I almost choked on my wine. Achieved. She thought Nia had achieved this. I looked across the room at my sister, who was currently posing for selfies near the fireplace. It was comical. They looked at a thief and saw a queen. They looked at the bankroll and saw a failure. Then Uncle Marcus chimed in. He was leaning against a pillar that I technically owned, looking around the room with awe. "This place is incredible," he boomed, spraying crumbs as he spoke. "Brad is a genius. Absolute genius. To make this kind of money in the tech world at his age is unheard of. We are so proud. It is good to see at least one of you girls settled down and secure." You know, Zuri, not everyone is cut out for the corporate rat race. Nia was smart to find a provider. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Secure. They kept using that word. They had no idea that the ground beneath their feet was made of quicksand. They had no idea that the provider they worshipped was drowning in debt, and that the rat racer they pitied was the only solvent person in the room. I swirled the liquid in my glass, watching the light catch the golden hue. A younger version of me would have snapped. I would have pulled out my phone and showed them the bank transfers. I would have screamed that I bought the shrimp they were eating. But the new Zuri simply smiled. It was a cold, tight smile that did not reach my eyes. It was the smile of a person who knows the ending of the movie while everyone else is still guessing the plot. "I hear you, Uncle Marcus," I said, my voice smooth and calm. "Nia certainly found a unique path to wealth. It is very inspiring." They nodded, missing the sarcasm entirely. They patted my shoulder and offered me pitying looks before drifting away to get more free food. I stood alone by the pillar watching them feast. Enjoy the shrimp, I thought. Enjoy the champagne. Eat and drink and be merry, because in about 20 minutes, I am going to turn the lights out on this party. I checked my watch again. The speeches were scheduled to start soon. That was my cue. I finished my wine in one gulp and placed the empty glass on a coaster. It was time to take the stage. I was standing near a marble pillar observing the circus when a familiar hand gripped my elbow with surprising strength. It was my mother, Patrice. She was wearing a floor-length gold gown that I recognized immediately because I had paid the credit card bill for it 2 months ago. Her face was flushed with champagne and the manic energy of a woman trying desperately to keep a sinking ship afloat. She did not say hello. She did not ask how I was. She simply steered me away from the crowd, dragging me into a shadowy alcove near the library entrance, where the thumping bass of the music was slightly muffled. "Zuri, baby, you look so serious," she hissed, glancing over her shoulder to make sure none of her church friends were watching. "You need to smile more. People are going to think you are unhappy for your sister. But listen, I need to ask you something quick before the speeches start." She leaned in close, and the smell of expensive perfume mixed with fear wafted over me. "Brad is having a tiny issue with liquidity, just a small hiccup with the bank transfers. You know how these big tech deals are. The money is there, but it is tied up in escrow for a few days." I stared at her without blinking. I knew exactly where the money was. It was not in escrow. It was in a hole. It was in a cryptocurrency wallet that had crashed and burned. But I let her continue. "He needs a bridge loan," she whispered. "Just $20,000. Just to cover the catering and the event staff for tonight. He does not want to embarrass the family by having a card declined in front of the vendors. If you could just write a check now, he will pay you back double next week when the big investor money clears." The request hung in the air like a bad smell. $20,000. After stealing $300,000 and a house, they still had the nerve to ask for pocket change to pay for the party they threw to celebrate the theft. It was not just greed anymore, it was pathology. I looked my mother dead in the eye and decided to give her one last chance to choose reality over the fantasy. "Mom, do you have any idea what the actual leverage ratio is on this property?" I asked, my voice low and clinical. "Do you know that Brad has not made a mortgage payment in 90 days? Do you know that the bank is not holding his money in escrow, but is actually preparing a seizure notice?" My mother physically recoiled as if I had slapped her. Her eyes narrowed into slits. "Stop it, Zuri," she snapped, cutting me off. "There you go again with your spreadsheets and your pessimism. You always want to find the negative because you cannot stand to see someone else shine. Brad is a visionary. Visionaries have complicated finances that people like you do not understand. He is building an empire, and you are worried about a few late fees." She smoothed her dress and looked at me with pure disdain. "You are so petty. If you do not want to help the family, just say so, but do not stand there and make up lies to ruin this night. I will ask your Uncle Marcus. At least he believes in us." She turned on her heel and stormed back toward the party, leaving me alone in the hallway. I watched her go and felt the last tiny thread of guilt snap. She had made her choice. She chose the lie. She chose the charlatan over the daughter who had kept her warm and fed for a decade. I reached into my clutch and touched the foreclosure documents. I was not being petty, Mom. I was being the owner. And since you refused to listen to the warning, you are going to have to listen to the eviction. The music faded into a respectful silence as a spotlight cut through the dim room, illuminating the raised platform by the grand fireplace. Brad stepped into the light. He held a microphone in one hand and a glass of vintage champagne in the other. He looked every inch the conqueror. His suit was tailored, his hair was perfectly coiffed, and his smile was bright enough to blind the front row. The crowd hushed their faces, turned upward in adoration, waiting for the wisdom of the golden boy. I stood in the back, leaning against a wall obscured by the shadows, watching the performance, with the detached fascination of a scientist observing a specimen. Testing, testing, Brad said, his voice booming through the high-end speakers that I had undoubtedly paid for. He chuckled a warm, self-deprecating sound that charmed the room instantly. Wow. Just wow. I look around this room tonight and I am truly humbled. They say that success is a lonely road, but looking at all of you, I know that is not true. Success is a community, it is a family. He paused for effect, letting the applause wash over him. My parents were standing in the front row. My mother was dabbing her eyes with a napkin, her face twisted in a rictus of pride. My father was nodding solemnly as if he had personally laid the bricks of this mansion. Brad continued, his voice dropping to a register meant to convey deep emotion. When I started Future Tech Ventures, people called me crazy. They said the market was too volatile. They said a kid from the suburbs could not disrupt the industry. But I had a vision. I had a dream. And most importantly, I had faith. I woke up every single morning at 4 a.m. and grinded while the world was sleeping. I built this empire brick by brick with my own 2 hands and the grace of God. I felt a bitter laugh trapped in my throat. His own 2 hands. His hands had never touched anything rougher than a steering wheel. The only thing he had grinded was my bank account balance. He was rewriting history in real time, erasing my sacrifice and replacing it with a myth of self-made grit. And I could not have done it without my rock, he said, gesturing grandly to Nia, who was preening beside him. Nia, baby, you are my muse. You believed in me when I had nothing but a laptop and a dream. You held the vision when the nights were dark. This house is not just a building. It is a monument to your love and your faith in me. The crowd erupted. Women sighed. Nia blew him a kiss, her eyes shimmering with tears. Brad went on listing people to thank. He thanked his college roommate. He thanked his yoga instructor. He thanked the caterer by name. He even thanked the valet staff for parking the cars. He thanked every single person who had contributed a molecule of effort to his life. But he never said my name. Not once. I was standing 20 feet away, the woman who had liquidated her life savings to prevent his homelessness, the woman who was currently financing the champagne he was toasting with, and I did not exist. To him, I was just a resource to be mined and discarded. I was the silent partner who was expected to remain silent forever. As he raised his glass for the final toast, shouting to the future, I gripped my clutch so hard the leather creaked. He wanted a toast. I would give him a toast. I pushed off the wall and began to walk slowly toward the stage. The time for silence was over. As the applause for Brad's self-aggrandizing speech faded into a murmur, I stepped out of the shadows. I walked straight down the center aisle. My black suit cut a sharp silhouette against the sea of pastel dresses and tuxedos, making me look like a scar across the perfection of the evening. The crowd parted for me, not out of respect, but out of confusion. They whispered to each other, wondering why the sullen sister in the funeral suit was approaching the throne. I kept my eyes locked on Brad. I saw his smile falter just for a fraction of a second. He looked at Nia and she gave a small nervous shrug. They assumed I was coming to make a scene or perhaps to finally grovel for their approval publicly. I climbed the 3 steps to the platform. The sound of my heels on the wood was heavy and deliberate, like the ticking of a clock. I reached for the microphone. Brad hesitated, holding onto it tight. His knuckles were white. For a moment, we played a silent game of tug-of-war. I looked him dead in the eyes and smiled. It was the sharpest, coldest smile I had ever worn. Let me add a few words, Brad, I said loud enough for the front row to hear without the amp. After all, family is everything, right? He let go. He had to. To refuse me would look weak in front of his investors. He stepped back, wrapping his arm around Nia, playing the role of the benevolent patriarch, allowing the little people to speak. I turned to face the crowd. The spotlight blinded me for a moment, but I adjusted quickly. I saw my mother in the front row. Her eyes were wide with panic. She was mouthing the words, "Sit down." I ignored her. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice steady and amplified, filling the cavernous room. Brad just gave a beautiful speech about hard work. He talked about transparency. He talked about the sacrifices made to build this legacy. And I felt that such a powerful sentiment deserved a tangible illustration. I did not bring a physical gift tonight because Brad and Nia already have everything they could possibly want. Instead, I brought clarity. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. The screen glowed in the dim light. I held it up like a holy relic. You see, there is a very interesting feature in this house that Brad forgot to mention. The sound system is fully integrated. It connects to everything, including the truth. I tapped the settings icon on my screen. The room went deadly silent. You could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. I scrolled down to the device list. The words "Living Room Master System" appeared. I tapped Connect. A loud digital chime rang out through the speakers, followed by a robotic female voice that announced "Bluetooth connected." Brad stepped forward, his confidence cracking. "Zuri, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice tight with warning. "This is not the time for a slideshow." I turned to him and lowered the microphone slightly. "It is not a slideshow, Brad," I whispered. "It is a flashback." I turned back to the crowd. "I think it is important for everyone here, specifically the investors and the family members who think I am just the bitter sister, to understand exactly how the sausage is made." I pressed the file manager app. The waveform of the recording from 3 days ago appeared on the screen. It was jagged and ugly. I hovered my finger over the play button. I looked at my parents. My father was gripping his chair. My mother was standing up, her hand reaching out as if to stop a bullet. But it was too late. The trigger was already pulled. I pressed my thumb against the glass screen. For a split second there was a crackle of static, and then the voice of my father Desmond boomed through the speakers at a volume usually reserved for stadium concerts. It was not the somber, tearful voice he used when he called me about the eviction. It was a voice thick with laughter and mockery. "She is such an easy mark," he said, the sound bouncing off the high vaulted ceilings. "I just had to squeeze out a few tears about the old house, and she opened the checkbook wide. I barely had to try." The room froze. A waiter dropped a tray of champagne glasses, and the shattering glass sounded like an explosion in the sudden silence. But the recording kept playing. Now it was my mother's voice, clear and sharp. "She has no life anyway, Desmond. We are doing her a favor, giving her money a purpose. What else is she going to spend it on? She is going to die alone with her cats. At least this way Nia gets to live like a queen." I watched the color drain from Nia's face. She looked from the speakers to me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The guests were looking at each other in horror. These were church members, business associates, and neighbors. They were listening to the pillar of the community and the saintly mother discuss how they had psychologically manipulated their eldest daughter. Then came the final voice. It was Brad. His voice on the tape was arrogant and dismissive, the voice of a man counting his winnings. "The cow is milked dry, guys. I got the transfer. We can buy the house in the morning. Zuri is a useful idiot, but man is she exhausting. Once the check clears, we can cut her loose. We do not need to pretend to like her anymore." The recording ended, but the echo seemed to hang in the air like a poisonous cloud. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. It was the sound of a reputation dying in real time. My mother had collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands. My father was staring at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eye. But Brad was different. Brad was furious. His face turned a violent shade of red. He looked at the horrified investors in the front row, and then he looked at me with pure hatred. "Turn it off!" he screamed, his voice cracking. He abandoned all pretense of civility. He lunged toward me, taking the stairs two at a time, his hands reached out as if to strangle the truth back into the phone. I did not flinch. I did not move. I did not have to. Before Brad could get within 5 feet of me, two men who had been standing quietly by the emergency exit stepped forward. They were large, impassive, and wearing suits that cost more than Brad's car. One of them simply extended a hand and placed it on Brad's chest, stopping his momentum instantly. It was like watching a child run into a brick wall. Brad stumbled back, gasping for air. "Who are you?" he shouted, trying to regain his balance. "Get out of my house!" I leaned into the microphone one last time. "It is not your house, Brad," I said, my voice calm and commanding. "And these are not guests. They are security for Nemesis Holdings, and they are here to ensure that the eviction proceedings go smoothly." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually follows a gunshot or a car crash. The guests stood frozen with their champagne glasses halfway to their mouths, staring at the stage where the family drama had just detonated. Brad was panting heavily against the arm of the security guard, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. My parents were statues of humiliation in the front row. Nia was weeping softly, her mascara running down her face in black rivulets. I tapped the screen of my phone one last time, disconnecting the Bluetooth. The connection chime rang out, signaling the end of the broadcast. I reached into my leather clutch and pulled out the thick manila envelope I had been carrying all night. It was the only accessory I needed. I walked to the edge of the platform, towering over Brad. "You seem confused, Brad," I said, my voice projecting clearly without the need for shouting. "You keep talking about your house and your empire, but you seem to have forgotten a fundamental rule of business. If you do not pay your debts, you do not own the asset. The bank does, and as of 9 o'clock this morning, the bank sold that debt to a private equity firm." I paused, letting the words sink in. I saw the gears turning in his head. He was trying to calculate how this was possible. He was trying to find a loophole. "The firm is called Nemesis Holdings." I continued, taking a step closer. "And in case you have not figured it out yet, I am Nemesis Holdings. I am the sole proprietor, which means I am not your sister-in-law anymore. I am your landlord, and you are a delinquent tenant." A gasp rippled through the room. I saw Uncle Marcus drop his fork. I saw the investors in the back exchanging terrified looks, realizing they had almost given money to a fraud. Brad shook his head violently. "No," he stammered, his voice weak. "That is impossible. You do not have that kind of money. We took everything you had. You took my savings," I corrected him coldly. "You did not take my credit, and you certainly did not take my intelligence. I liquidated everything to buy this note, Brad. I bet on your failure, and you paid out beautifully." I raised the envelope and tossed it at him. The papers fluttered through the air, hitting his chest before scattering across the polished wood floor. He looked down at the documents. The bold letters at the top were unmistakable. "Notice of default. Notice of foreclosure. Eviction order." "This is a formal notice to vacate," I announced, addressing the entire family. "You have exactly 24 hours to remove your personal effects from my property. That includes the furniture, the clothes, and that ridiculous robotic lawnmower. Anything left on the premises after sundown tomorrow will be considered abandoned property and will be donated to charity." Nia stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Zuri, please," she begged, reaching out a hand. "Where are we supposed to go?" "Mom and Dad gave up the rental. We have nowhere." I looked at my sister. I looked at the woman who had laughed about cutting me loose. I looked at my parents who had called me a useful idiot. I felt nothing, no pity, no anger, just the cool indifference of a stranger. "That sounds like a liquidity problem," I said, using their own words against them. "I am sure a visionary like Brad can figure it out." "You have 24 hours. I suggest you start packing. I turned my back on them and walked off the stage, my heels clicking on the floor marking the countdown of their demise. The crowd parted for me again, but this time they did not look confused. They looked at me with fear and respect. I walked out of the double doors and into the night, leaving the ruins of their vanity behind me. I had almost reached the heavy oak doors when I heard the sound of footsteps pounding against the floorboards behind me. It was Nia. She grabbed my arm, her grip desperate and trembling. I stopped, but I did not turn around immediately. I let her spin me around so I could see the ruin in her eyes. Her mascara was smeared across her cheeks like war paint, and her chest was heaving with sobbing breaths. "You are a monster!" she screamed, her voice shrill and breaking. "How could you be so cruel, Zuri? We are family. You are throwing us on the street over money. You have billions of dollars in your soul, but no heart. You are destroying my marriage and my life because you are jealous. You have always been jealous that Brad chose me." I looked at her. Even now, at the end of all things, she still believed the fairy tale. She still believed that she was the prize and I was the bitter spinster. She thought I was evicting them out of spite. She did not understand that I was actually performing a surgical excision of a tumor. I realized then that taking the house was not enough. She needed to know exactly what she was fighting for. She needed to know that the prize she was clutching so tightly was actually poison. I reached into the inner pocket of my blazer. I pulled out the smaller envelope, the one Vance, the private investigator, had given me. I looked at Brad, who was still standing by the stage trying to rally the confused investors. When he saw the envelope, his face turned the color of ash. He knew. He started running toward us, shouting incoherent protests, but he was too far away. "I am not jealous, Nia," I said, my voice soft but lethal. "And I am not cruel. I am actually the only person in this room who is telling you the truth. You want to know why the mortgage wasn't paid. You want to know where the capital for the business went. You think it went into research and development." I tossed the stack of photos into the air. They fluttered down between us like a slow-motion rain of glossy paper. They landed on the polished floor face up. A dozen high-resolution images of Brad's infidelity lay scattered at Nia's feet. There was a photo of Brad kissing the blonde woman outside the hotel. There was a photo of them entering a suite. There was a copy of the credit card statement highlighting the charges for jewelry and spa treatments. And right in the center was a clear shot of them in the Tesla, my Tesla laughing as he touched her face. The room went silent again. The guests who had started to whisper leaned in to see what was on the floor. Nia looked down. She stared at the images for a long time. Her brain was trying to reject what her eyes were seeing. She fell to her knees, not in prayer, but in shock, picking up a photo with shaking hands. "This is why your husband did not pay the mortgage," I said, looking down at her. "He was too busy financing his mistress. He took the money I gave our parents to save their home and he used it to play big shot with a 22-year-old secretary. You are not the queen of this castle, Nia. You are just the roommate he keeps around for appearances." Brad finally reached us, breathless and panicked. "Nia, baby, listen to me," he stammered, reaching for her shoulder. "It is fake. It is AI generated. Zuri made it up to hurt us. She is crazy." Nia looked up at him. She looked at the photo in her hand, then at his face. For the first time in her life, the fog lifted. She saw the sweat on his brow. She saw the terror in his eyes. She saw the lie. She stood up slowly, dropping the photo. She did not scream. She did not hit him. She just looked at him with a hollowness that was more terrifying than any rage. And in that moment, I knew my work was done. I had not just taken their house. I had broken the spell. The party was effectively over. The investors were fleeing like rats from a sinking ship, clutching their checkbooks tight. Brad was trying to chase after them, shouting about misunderstandings, while Nia stood frozen, staring at the photos of her husband's betrayal as if they were alien artifacts. That left only two people to deal with: Desmond and Patrice. They stood amidst the ruins of their social climbing ambitions, looking small and terrified. The arrogance they had displayed on the recording was gone, replaced by the primal fear of survival. They saw me turning to leave and panic took over. My father, who had always carried himself with a false sense of dignity, scrambled toward me. My mother followed, her gold dress trailing on the floor she had just learned she did not own. They caught up to me near the door, blocking my path. My mother actually fell to her knees, clutching at the fabric of my trousers. "Zuri, please," she wailed, tears streaming down her face that finally looked genuine. "You cannot do this. We are your flesh and blood. Where will we go? We gave up the lease. We have nothing." My father joined the chorus, his voice trembling. "Zuri, listen to reason. We made mistakes. We were blinded by Brad's promises. But we are still your parents. You cannot let us sleep on the street. It is a sin to abandon your elders. God will punish you for this." I looked down at them. A lifetime of guilt-tripping usually worked. A lifetime of fearing their disappointment usually made me open my wallet. But as I looked at my mother groveling on the floor, I did not see a parent. I saw a stranger. I saw a parasite that I had been feeding for 30 years. The recording played in my head again. "She is a useful idiot." I gently but firmly pulled my leg away from my mother's grasp. I took a step back, creating a physical boundary between us. "Stop talking about family," I said, my voice ice cold. "Family protects each other. Family does not conspire to defraud their children. You do not have a daughter. You never wanted a daughter. You wanted a retirement plan. You wanted a banker. You wanted a safety net." I leaned down slightly so they could see the absolute finality in my eyes. "You called me a useful idiot. You said I was an easy mark. Well, you were right about one thing. I was useful. I was a machine that dispensed cash whenever you pushed the right emotional buttons. But you forgot that machines need maintenance. You forgot that machines have limits." I straightened up and looked at them with a mixture of pity and disgust. "I am not your child anymore. I am an ATM. That is how you treated me, and that is what I became. But I have bad news for you." I tapped my chest right over my heart. "This ATM is out of order. The account is closed. The PIN code has been changed. There will be no more withdrawals." My mother let out a fresh sob, reaching for me again, but I stepped out of range. "Do not call me," I said. "Do not come to my office. Do not write me letters. If you show up at my building, security will treat you like any other trespasser. You have 24 hours to vacate my property. I suggest you spend less time begging and more time packing." I turned around and pushed open the heavy double doors. The cool night air hit my face, and it felt like baptism. I walked down the stone steps past the valet, who was looking at me with wide eyes, and got into my car. I did not look back at the mansion. I did not look back at the people wailing in the foyer. I put the car in drive and pulled away, leaving the wreckage of my past in the rearview mirror. For the first time in my life, I was completely alone, and I had never felt more free. I had barely shifted the car into drive when the night was fractured by a new set of lights. These were not the soft ambient lights of a garden party. They were the harsh strobing blue and red bars of the local police department. 3 squad cars screeched around the corner, blocking the driveway and boxing in the fleet of leased luxury vehicles. I pulled over to the curb and lowered my window, allowing the cool night air to mix with the sound of approaching justice. I did not call the police because of the noise. I had called them 3 days ago when I sent a comprehensive dossier of Brad's financial activities to the district attorney's office. You see, the forensic audit I performed did not just prove he was a bad husband or a squatter, it proved he was a criminal. The shell company Future Tech Ventures was not just a hole he threw my money into. It was a laundering vehicle he had been using to process stolen credit card data and fraudulent small business loans. I found the trail, I documented the flow of funds, and I handed the smoking gun to the authorities on a silver platter. I watched from the safety of my car as the uniformed officers marched up the stone steps I had just descended. The front doors were still open, framing the chaos inside like a stage play. Brad was standing in the foyer, shouting at my father, waving his arms in a manic attempt to blame someone else for the ruin of the evening. He did not see the officers until they were 3 feet away. Bradley Jenkins, a deep voice boomed, echoing out into the street. You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. Put your hands behind your back. The color drained from Brad's face, leaving him looking like a ghost. He tried to stammer an excuse. He tried to pull the "Do you know who I am" card, but the handcuffs clicked shut with a metallic finality that cut off his protest. The guests who had lingered to watch the family drama now scrambled to get out of the way, pulling out their phones to record the downfall. The flashbulbs popped like fireworks, documenting the golden boy being dragged out of his stolen castle. My mother screamed. It was a raw, primal sound of denial. She grabbed the officer's arm, shrieking that there had been a mistake, that her son-in-law was a genius and a pillar of the community. The officer gently but firmly pushed her back, warning her about obstruction of justice. My father stood paralyzed, watching the police shove Brad into the back of a cruiser. His retirement plan, his legacy, his pride was being hauled away in handcuffs. Nia did not move. She stood in the doorway, clutching the photos of the affair in one hand and the eviction notice in the other, watching her husband disappear into the back of the police car. She looked small and broken, stripped of her illusions and her arrogance. The party was officially over. The music had stopped, the champagne was warm, and the family was destroyed. I rolled up my window, shutting out the noise of the sirens and the screaming. I did not feel joy. I did not feel sadness. I felt the deep, satisfying exhaustion of a job well done. The balance sheet was finally corrected. The liabilities had been liquidated. I put the car in gear and drove away into the quiet darkness, leaving the flashing lights in my rearview mirror. Nemesis Holdings had closed its first major deal, and business was good. It has been exactly 30 days since the blue lights of the police cruisers painted the driveway of the Silver Creek mansion. I am sitting in my office now, watching the rain streak against the glass of the window, looking down at the city that used to feel like a battleground, but now feels like home. The silence in my life is absolute, and it is the most expensive luxury I have ever purchased. The fallout was swift and brutal, just like the justice system is designed to be when you hand them a confession wrapped in forensic evidence. Brad did not fight the charges. When his lawyer saw the mountain of proof I had compiled, the wire transfers, the fake invoices, the laundered funds, he advised Brad to take a plea deal immediately. The golden boy of the tech world is currently trading cigarettes for protection in a minimum security federal facility upstate. He was sentenced to 8 years for wire fraud and embezzlement. I heard through the grapevine that he is working in the prison laundry. It seems fitting since he spent so much time using a laundromat as his corporate headquarters. Nia's fall from grace was perhaps the hardest to watch, but necessary. The divorce papers were signed within a week. Without Brad's stolen money and without my financial support, she faced a reality she had avoided for her entire adult life. She had no degree, no work experience, and no assets. The mansion was seized by Nemesis Holdings and sold to a legitimate developer to recoup my losses. Nia moved into a studio apartment that is smaller than her old walk-in closet. I saw her yesterday, actually. I was buying groceries and I chose the checkout line on the far left. She was wearing a red vest, scanning items with a look of dull resignation on her face. She did not see me. She was too busy apologizing to a customer because her hands were shaking as she bagged the organic vegetables she used to post on Instagram. I did not say hello. I simply paid for my groceries and walked away. As for Desmond and Patrice, the eviction was not a threat, it was a promise. Since they had voluntarily given up their rent-controlled home to chase the fantasy of the mansion, they found themselves at the mercy of the current housing market. With no savings and a damaged credit score, thanks to Keo signing some of Brad's smaller loans, they had very few options. They are currently living in a state-subsidized senior housing complex on the east side. It is a gray concrete building with thin walls and no garden. My cousin told me they spend their days complaining to anyone who will listen about their ungrateful daughter who abandoned them. They tell stories about how they were swindled by a con artist, but they never mention that they were his willing accomplices. They still call my old number sometimes. I see the blocked notifications pop up on my phone log. Desmond calling. Patrice calling. But I never answer. The ATM is permanently out of service. I drank my coffee and turned back to my computer screen. The spreadsheet was balanced. The debt was paid. And for the first time in my life, I was operating at a profit. In the world of forensic accounting, we live and die by a principle known as the sunk cost fallacy. It is a behavioral bias that tricks your brain into believing you must continue to invest in a failing endeavor simply because you have already invested so much time, money, and effort into it. You tell yourself that if you just write one more check or give it one more month, the numbers will turn around. You tell yourself that you cannot walk away now because then all that past suffering would be for nothing. It is the logic that keeps bad businesses running, and it is the logic that kept me trapped in a toxic family for 30 years. I looked at my parents and my sister not as people, but as investments. I thought that if I was just patient enough or generous enough or successful enough, they would finally yield a return. I thought that eventually, my sacrifice would mature into respect, and my loyalty would pay out in love. But that is not how emotional economics works. Some accounts are simply black holes. They do not accumulate value. They only consume it. And the more you pour into them, the more you lose. The decision to cut my losses was the most terrifying financial move of my life. Society tells us that family is a fixed asset. We are told that blood is thicker than water and that you cannot divorce your DNA. We are conditioned to believe that walking away is a sign of weakness or failure. But I am here to tell you, that is a lie. Walking away is a strategic correction. It is the only way to stop the hemorrhaging. Since the night of the party, I have discovered a new kind of wealth. It is not the numbers in my bank account, although those are finally growing again. It is the wealth of peace. I wake up in the morning and my phone is silent. There are no emergency texts demanding cash. There are no manufactured crises. There is no guilt-tripping voicemail waiting for me. I drink my coffee in a quiet apartment, and for the first time in my life, the silence does not feel lonely. It feels expensive. It feels like freedom. I used to think that cutting them off would leave a hole in my heart. I expected to mourn the loss of my mother and father and sister. But you cannot mourn something you never really had. I was mourning a fantasy. I was mourning the idea of a family, not the reality of the predators who lived in my house. Once I accepted that the family I wanted did not exist, it became incredibly easy to let go of the people who were pretending to be them. Cutting losses is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of radical self-preservation. It is the moment you decide that your own sanity is more valuable than their approval. It is the moment you realize that you cannot save someone who is determined to drown, especially when they are trying to use you as a life raft. I saved myself. I balanced my own books. And as I sit here looking out at the skyline, I realize that for the first time in my story, I am not in the red. I am in the black. And the future looks incredibly profitable. The sun was beginning to set over the city, casting long purple shadows across my living room floor. I was just about to close my laptop and pour a second glass of Pinot Noir when my personal phone buzzed on the mahogany desk. I glanced at the screen. It was not a blocked call from my parents. It was not a call from the prison. It was a private number. In my line of work, a private number usually means trouble or a very high-level audit. I hesitated for a moment, my thumb hovering over the decline button, but curiosity got the better of me. I swiped right and brought the phone to my ear. "This is Zuri," I said, my voice professional and guarded. There was a pause on the other end, followed by a low, sophisticated chuckle. It sounded like the clinking of crystal glasses. "Ms. Washington," the voice said. It was a woman's voice, aged like fine wine and dripping with old money authority. "My name is Eleanor St. James. I believe you recently concluded a rather aggressive business transaction with my biological son, Bradley." I felt a jolt of adrenaline. Brad had always bragged about his family being old money, but he claimed they were estranged. I assumed it was another lie. I assumed he was an orphan who invented a backstory. But the name St. James is legendary in real estate circles. If this woman was real, she was a titan. I sat up straighter. Mrs. St. James, if you are calling to threaten me with a lawsuit on his behalf, I should warn you that my legal team is excellent. Eleanor laughed again, a dry, sharp sound. A lawsuit, she repeated with amusement. My dear girl, I cut Bradley out of my will 15 years ago when he tried to pawn my diamond earrings to buy a sports car. I have been watching the news. I saw the court filings. I saw how you dismantled his little shell company. I must say it was masterful. Most people let emotion cloud their judgment. You treated him exactly like what he is, a bad investment. I remained silent, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I am calling because I have a proposition. Eleanor continued, her tone shifting from amusement to business. I run a portfolio of distressed commercial assets. It is a messy business. It requires a certain lack of sentimentality. My current CFO is too soft. He hesitates to pull the plug on failing ventures. You, on the other hand, evicted your own sister and put my son in federal prison to recoup your losses. That is the kind of ruthlessness I can work with. I walked over to the window, looking out at the glittering skyline. The irony was suffocating. Brad had spent his life pretending to have access to this world, lying and stealing to fake it. And now, by destroying him, I had been invited into the inner circle he could only dream of. I am in the city for a few days, Eleanor said. I am staying at the Ritz. I would like to buy you breakfast tomorrow. I think Nemesis Holdings and St. James Industries could have a very profitable future. What do you say? I looked at my reflection in the glass. The red lipstick was still perfect. The black suit still fit like armor. I smiled. It was not the smile of a victim. It was the smile of a partner. I take my coffee. Black, Mrs. St. James, I said. I will see you at 8. I ended the call and placed the phone face down on the desk. I picked up my wineglass and swirled the dark red liquid. My parents were in a shelter. My sister was bagging groceries. My ex-brother-in-law was in a cell, and I was about to have breakfast with a billionaire. I took a slow, deliberate sip of wine, tasting the notes of cherry and oak. The ledger was closed, the debt was paid, and the real game was just beginning. The most dangerous financial trap isn't a bad market investment. It is a toxic relationship. Zuri's story teaches us that the sunk cost fallacy applies to people too. We often cling to family out of guilt or history, even when they actively drain our resources and sanity. But loyalty is not a suicide pact. When love becomes a one-sided transaction, the only profitable move is to stop the bleeding. True power comes from realizing that no is a complete sentence, and that protecting your peace is the highest form of self-respect. You cannot save people who are determined to drown you. If you enjoyed watching this cold-blooded justice unfold, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments, have you ever had to audit a toxic person out of your life?